What's up guys, I'm Sean. In today's video we're going to be changing the power steering reservoir and hoses on this BMW E46 M3. So this is the power steering reservoir kit that I bought from ECS Tuning. It's about $100 and this is an aftermarket ZF reservoir container, but the hoses are OEM. So here's the tools you need to do the job. This is to remove the intake funnel, an 8 to remove the under tray, 10 to remove part of the intake, some channel pliers along with the flathead to remove the clamp on the hose of the power steering reservoir. This is what I'm going with, actually automatic transmission fluid that people use as power steering fluid, and something to catch the mess, as well as a jack and jack stands. The first thing we're going to remove is the intake. You pop these little rivets off and then use a flathead screwdriver to undo the clamps and the 10mm right there, and then you can pull the intake box off and you remove the MAF as well. The 10mm bolts are off and I'm going to pop the intake off. The clamps are already loose. Squeeze the MAF connector and then I'm going to wiggle out the top half of the intake first, and this is an aftermarket elbow, but your intake should look similar. This is box off. This is my aftermarket SMG cooling hose that I installed. So we want to get to the reservoir here and the hoses underneath. So my car has 150,000 miles and I'm pretty sure the power steering reservoir is cracked or leaking, because you can tell that the hose that runs underneath the power steering reservoir is kind of stained with oil. So I have the car on jack stands and I'm going to remove the plastic under tray underneath the car. So now I'm going to remove the under tray, and there's 3 8mm bolts here, and there should be 2 on this side and 2 on the other side, and then you remove the under tray. Tray removed. So last time I did an oil change, I saw that there's some fluid on my under tray, and I thought it was maybe my oil pan gasket, but thankfully it's my power steering reservoir and hose. So you should see that there's actually a drip on the bottom of the reservoir and hose. So I'm actually glad that it's my power steering reservoir and hose rather than my my engine block. So that's a good sign. So now we're gonna get to removing it. So I have this container here to catch the power steering fluid that's going to drain from the reservoir. So if you follow the reservoir tank on top, I'm going to remove this clamp. So it's off. So I'm just grabbing it with pliers. Then you already see the power steering fluid coming out, which is what we expect. And just slide the hose up so the fluid start draining, and make sure you have your thing to catch it. There it is. So now we're at the top of the engine bay, and we're going to move the other hose coming from the bottom of the reservoir, and you follow it, it actually comes up to this right here. So to remove this hose, you're just going to press down on this plastic piece, and then the hose should slide out. So this is the one hose that may give you a little bit of trouble, and basically if you look at this carefully, you can push it down, and it basically relieves the tension from the hose. So I'm using my L pliers again, and I'm going to push down on this plastic piece while I pull up on the bottom of the wire. So I loosen this 10mm bolt, and now the whole reservoir should just kind of slide up. You see there's still more fluid draining. Pull this whole thing out, one piece. So you can see it's all wet here. So my reservoir probably has a crack in it. So the leak could be coming from there, or the hoses, but I figure I'll change the reservoir and these hoses, only for about 100 bucks, so not a bad deal. The high pressure power steering hoses look fine for now, but if that comes up, I'll change it later. If you look carefully on the OEM reservoir, there's an arrow pointing down, so the fluid comes down here, and on the other side there's an arrow pointing up. This side, the arrow pointing down, and we want to put this hose here. So I'm going to do that now, so you make sure that it lines up with the orientation. So arrow pointing down, and the hose in the same orientation. And we know to install the other hose on the other side. To remove this, you don't really need a special tool or anything. What I've been doing is using a flathead screwdriver and just kind of prying it slowly. And there's a little tab here that it'll eventually pop off. See, so it just came off. And now once it's off, then you could use a pair of pliers to pull it off. But I'll show you what the clip looks like. This is what the clip looks like. So it wraps around the hose and you can squeeze it back. So when I reinstalled it, I just use pliers like this. And I'll show you in a second. So here's the new one. I'm just going to slide this clamp over here and install it to the reservoir tank. Squeeze the hose all the way in, try to line it up like the way the factory one is. And to get this clamp on, we're just going to use a pair of pliers. It's locked in. So there it is. It's locked in, pretty easy. So this is good to go. Now I'm just going to install it. And installing it is basically the reverse of removing it. So I just wiped everything down on the top, make sure it's clean. And I'm going to slide these hoses in. So the tank is down. Obviously we're not going to tighten it yet. So we're going to reinstall this hose. I'm going to basically just slide it in and it should snap in. That's it. You heard it click. It's in. This little wire tie, it just snaps back into place. So this is in. So now I'm going to go underneath the car. So now we're underneath the car. And I'm going to slide this hose clamp on here first. Here. Slide that on. And now I'm going to position the hose clamp and tighten the hose clamp. The bottom is done, so I'm gonna make sure. Make sure you wipe everything dry. So if there's any future leaks, you can make sure that you can see where it's coming from. So I'm gonna wipe this dry. Go to the top, reinstall this 10mm bolt holding the reservoir tank in place. You don't have to over tighten it because you're gonna crack it. Just make it, you know, hand tight. So now we're gonna add power steering fluid. Or actually, in this case, I'm going with the automatic transmission fluid. It's Dixon 3. And if you do research, you see that a lot of people put ATF fluid into the power steering unit. So I'm going to add fluid, and after that, I'm going to show you guys how to bleed the unit. I added the fluid. You want to make sure it's almost at the top. But the fluid really didn't go down much because there's air in the hoses. So the next thing we're going to do is bleed the power steering. So to do that, we can leave the reservoir cap off the reservoir container. And we actually don't need to put the intake box back on because we're not driving the car. To bleed the power steering, what we're going to do is basically turn on the engine and turn the steering wheel left to right and watch the container for air bubbles. In the meantime, I have fans running because the garage needs to be ventilated. So make sure your garage is open when you're doing this. So the power steering was full. Now it actually went down to half. So I'm going to continue to turn it left to right to bleed more air out. So with the engine on, we're just basically going to turn the steering slowly left and then right. We're going to do that lock to lock several times to bleed the air out of the system. So now I just topped off the reservoir container. So it's about almost full, but you don't want to make it max. So it's probably a little bit more than 2/3. So what I'm going to do now is put on the cap and go underneath to inspect to see if there's any leaks. So I just went underneath, checked everything. There's no leaks, everything looks good. So all you have to do is put everything back together. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.